before I jump back into reviewing WWF pay-per-views from the year 2000, I thought I'd bring something to everybody's attention that kind of caught my ear recently while watching some of these old shows and struck me as very interesting. So I want to get other people's thoughts on it and see what they all think. So I started listening to Conrad Thompson's podcast with Jeff Jarrett, My World, as specifically the Lockdown 2005 episode. Now, Lockdown is a show I've talked about quite a bit. And it was a show that happened at a time in TNA where I was just starting to really dive into TNA and accept it as a possible alternative to WWE. And so I have very vivid memories of watching that first Lockdown show, even though I was vehemently opposed the whole concept of the entire event. But because I listened to the podcast, I figured, might as well, I'll go back and I'll actually watch the pay-per-view itself. And fortunately, Impact Wrestling on their YouTube channel, they have the entire event available to watch for free. So I got up to the opening video package and something caught my ear that I didn't notice when I first saw the pay-per-view back in 2005. And that is in the opening video package. Now, normally at this time, TNA pay-per-views, you would expect to hear the voice of one Barry Scott, who has passed away since. But at the time, he was known as the TNA voiceover guy who had this deep, awesome-sounding voice that was perfect for the video packages that TNA put together for their various pay-per-view events. It became kind of a staple of TNA programming to hear his voice. And though his voice could be heard on the Lockdown opening video package, his voice was not the predominant one that carried through the entire thing. It was actually a female voice putting on a very, very creepy sounding voice to make the 6 Sides of Steel, which was the major selling point of this event. Every match was in the 6 Sides of Steel, and making it sound like every single superstar that was participating in this event was walking into hell, and did a very effective job. It was very creepy, very atmospheric, and everything, and I thought that at the time I first saw this pay-per-view, I was like, man, this video opening package is pretty damn good. But I noticed something this time around that I didn't notice back then, and her voice sounded very familiar to me. Very, very familiar. And immediately in my mind, I knew exactly what it reminded me of, and I won't say it just yet, but it's kind of an interesting connection. But I had that moment of realization again when I was watching WWF pay-per-views from the year 2000, and I got up to Unforgiven 2000, which will not be reviewed in this video, because the events that I'll be covering in this video will take me up to SummerSlam of 2000, so Unforgiven will be covered next time. But in watching Unforgiven, I noticed that pay-per-view also had a female voiceover doing the opening video package, and the voice sounded pretty much identical to the woman who did the Lockdown 2005 video package. So much so that I'm absolutely convinced it's the same person. It has to be. The voices are just too similar. But in the deep sanctum of my mind, it really brought something back from the deepest cores of my memory, and I realized something, that the voiceover, this woman, who I believe to be one Tamara Phillips, if I'm not mistaken, the voice is almost identical to a Star Wars character from one of the video games, one that I played extensively back when it first came out, and that is Bounty Hunter. This woman's voice, who can be heard on the opening video package for Lockdown 2005 and Unforgiven 2000, sounds, to me, in my mind, identical to Kamari Vosa, who is the Dark Fallen Jedi, who's the main boss of this video game. For those of you who don't remember, the Bounty Hunter video game, you play as Jango Fett, chasing down this evil cult that's trying to take over the galaxy, with one Kamari Vosa as the head of this cult, and she's a fallen Jedi who got brainwashed into the cult and then ultimately took it over from within. And she is a fantastic character and a great final boss for the video game. But in the voiceover or the cinematic segments, and you hear her voice, the voice that she has sounds, again, almost identical to what is heard on the 2 pay-per-view video packages that I'd brought up earlier. And to see if I'm crazy or not, here's the comparison.
If these bounty hunters surface again, we will deal with them.
It is an edifice of horror. a diabolical cauldron of suffering.
One vindictive soul, seeking to avenge an evil deed.
Kill them. Kill them now. Bring me their bodies.
Daunting, merciless, unforgiving.
Two jealous suitors, bound by a common passion.
Now tell me, who hired you?
6 sides of steel.
As darkness envelops the land, the night of reckoning is here.
I mean, I don't know. They sound very, very similar to me. Now, I've looked up information on Tamara Phillips, the voice actress who played Kamari Vosa, and there's nothing in any information I could find that she had participated in WWE production or TNA production or any kind of wrestling involvement at all whatsoever. And but she is known for being a voice actress and has extensive voice acting background. But I couldn't tell you, based on my research, I couldn't find any information on not only if she was involved in the production of these two pay-per-view video packages, but the names of anybody associated with them. It was a case of where, it's one of those weird things. Wrestling is probably the only form of televised entertainment that openly discourages any kind of end credits. I mean, think about it. Any other television show, they all have some kind of end credits, right? Well, I guess a lot of sports don't. A lot of sporting events don't, and that's probably that's where WWE and professional wrestling in general kind of like rides the line between being a real sport and scripted entertainment. So which camp should they fall under? The only times I can recall professional wrestling having any kind of end credits were, I think, a few episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event, and then the old WCW pay-per-views used to have end credits. But other than that, it's very uncommon in professional wrestling. And so I could not find any information on who the woman is on those two video packages and whether or not it's Tamara Phillips. So who knows? So am I crazy? Am I just digging into something that's kind of stupid and ridiculous? I don't know, but it caught my ear while watching some of these old shows, and it's weird the things I've got rolling around up here. It's like, I don't remember most of high school algebra, but Tamara Phillips, Kamari Vosa, it's like, I'm pretty sure that's her voice on those two pay-per-views, so tell me if I'm wrong. I posted the comparison here, so I want to get what you all think and see what you all say. And welcome everyone to part 2 of my series of videos reviewing the WWF pay-per-views from the year 2000. Now, the year 2000 was an amazing year for the WWF. Critically, creatively, financially, just about every metric you could possibly look into, 2000 was an excellent year for the company. And arguably, I think a lot of people would contend is the greatest year in WWF history and one of the most celebrated years, time periods in the company. It was, riding this ultimate high, and that had been started in 97 with the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and they just, it was a period where the WWF felt like they could do no wrong. Now, that's not to say there weren't some clunkers and some mistakes made, but generally the show was very, very exciting. Now, in part 1, we covered the first 4 pay-per-views of the year, which took us through WrestleMania season, the Royal Rumble, a WrestleMania that didn't really feel like a WrestleMania, and a Backlash event that felt more like WrestleMania than WrestleMania did. But generally, all 4 shows, comprised a very nice collection of events, the exception being WrestleMania, which was pretty bad. But the other 3 events were actually quite good and were more indicative of the high quality that was expected out of the company in the year 2000. So now we are into May, and we're kicking things off with Judgment Day 2000, happening on May 21st, and was held in Louisville, Kentucky, the Freedom Hall. And this show is most known for its main event, the hour-long Iron Man match between The Rock and Triple H. A very ambitious match to have. I think a lot of people had doubts going in whether or not Rock or Triple H could pull this match off. And if they weren't able to pull it off, it's almost like, you can't really blame them. I mean, it's a very hard match to pull off. I could probably count on two hands the number of guys who could hold my attention for an hour. It's a very hard match to do, but it is the match that this particular event is known for. But let's get started going into the match itself. We kick things off with a very exciting, action-packed six-man tag. The first ever, as far as I know, this was the first ever match to feature Team ECK, Edge, Christian, and Kurt Angle. Now, by this point, Edge and Christian were fully embracing their, kind of Bill and Ted, Ninja Turtle speak type heel personas. And they were doing great. I think last time I covered them, they'd won the tag titles at WrestleMania. And they were kind of like in this transitional phase of like going from faces to heels, but not quite there yet. Here, they're full-on heels. They're hilarious. Their whole persona, their whole gimmick that they embraced was amazing. And this is the Edge and Christian I think most of us remember fondly. The 5-second poses, the two dudes that reek of awesomeness, that type of thing. It was this was Edge and Christian at their absolute finest as a team, I think. When you look at the three teams that defined the tag team division during this era, the Hardy Boys, the Dudley Boys, and Edge and Christian, like the Dudley Boys, kind of their own thing, maybe cut from the cloth of like the Road Warriors, like that type of team, like the Brawling Bruiser type of team. The Hardy Boys were like the Rock and Roll Express, or the Rockers, like the high-flying, exciting, young, good-looking team. Edge and Christian was probably the Midnight Express in that scenario, kind of the classic heel team that would cheat to win at all costs. If I had to compare them to anybody, it was a very good setup they had, and proof that tag team wrestling can be very exciting. But Edge and Christian found a friend in the form of Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, rounding out the team of Team Eck, and it would eventually become Team Wreck when Rhino would come to the company and align himself with Edge and Christian. So, but yeah, Edge, Christian, and Kurt Angle had excellent chemistry as characters. Credit to Kurt, who fully embraced like the goofy stuff that they had him do, and he played it so well that it's hard to fault him. But they went up against Rikishi and Too Cool in the six-man tag to open things up, and it was a wild, action-packed match that showcased the best that all talents involved were able to do. Too Cool were kind of like the exciting comedy act team. Rikishi had the biggest drawing butt in the history of professional wrestling. I mean, really, seriously, it was the most over butt in pro wrestling history. The stink face got massively over. And fans loved the whole three-man act there, especially with the dance routine and everything like that. So this made for a very exciting opener where, surprisingly to me, Rikishi and Too Cool got the win, which seems weird because it's like on one side you've got Edge, Christian, and Kurt Angle, Edge and Christian being essentially their top tag team at this point, at least on the heel side of things. And Kurt Angle was the guy that they were grooming for main event stardom. And they wind up losing to Rikishi and Too Cool. Now, granted, Rikishi and Too Cool, mad over. I'm not denying that they weren't. It just felt like a weird decision to have Edge and Christian and Kurt Angle lose. And again, an ongoing theme, and as I cover these pay-per-views, the inconsistency in how Kurt Angle is booked, where it's like, all right, he gets destroyed at the Royal Rumble, then he wins the belt at No Way Out, then he loses both of his belts at WrestleMania, then he gets destroyed by Big Show in April at Backlash, and now here he's losing in the opening match of a six-man tag. It feels like, it's like, what are they doing with Kurt here? And, eventually the year, spoiler alert for those of you who don't know, eventually he's WWE champion by the end of the year. He finishes the year as WWE champion. And it's just weird, like, the inconsistencies in how he's booked. And we're going to see it again over the course of this, where he's being pinballed between being a winner and a loser constantly. And it's, I guess it's a credit to Kurt's ability to stay over during that kind of inconsistency, because I think if they were booking somebody like this today, we'd be criticizing it royally. But one other thing about this match that I feel needs to be called out is that because they were in Kentucky, Edge and Christian had to pull out a special variation of their 5-second pose where they did a spoof of a jug band making fun of the rednecks in the crowd, and it was absolutely hilarious. Everyone involved did their jobs well here, and it was great. So this was really good. So that was the exciting kind of action-packed, mixed with comedy style of opener. Next, we're getting something that's a little bit more pure wrestling. The Radicals, which by this point had fallen apart as a team, especially with Eddie Guerrero fully embracing his Latino Heat persona with China in his corner and their whole romance that would carry out through most of the rest of the year. It would be a triple threat match here for the European Championship. Eddie Guerrero defending his belt against Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn, his former teammates. And this was a fun match. This was good. I've said it before. I think Perry Saturn's underrated as a worker. Had he not had that infamous, shoot squash match with Mike Bell, he probably could have gone farther in the WWE. We'll never know. But I always felt like Perry Saturn was a very talented guy. And maybe his personal demons kind of got in the way too, but you watch his stuff in WCW and you watch some of his stuff here, like this match right here. There's a talent there that never really got tapped into. And of course, Dean Malenko, his reputation precedes himself, for what he lacked in like maybe mic skills and charisma, he more than made up for in in-ring ability and could work with just about anybody. And then Eddie's Eddie. Like Eddie's, of the three people in this match, Eddie's the one that's clearly the star. So this was a nice, briskly paced, solid, pure wrestling match with the best character of the bunch, Eddie Guerrero, getting the win and keeping his title through the help of China's involvement with the loaded roses that they would have, the lead pipe with the... they would have a bouquet of roses with a lead pipe in it, and that's was kind of their gimmick when they started as heels. Although it was not long after this that they would transition into being full-fledged faces. But it was a pretty solid match and a good use of the talents involved. So I was happy with this. It's also at this point in the show that we're getting some more hardcore title 24/7 antics. This time with Gerald Brisco kind of sneaking around the bathroom. Brisco had recently won the title from Crash Holly, and this would lead into an infamous match at King of the Ring 2000, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But by this point, I was really getting tired of the hardcore title stuff. To me, the 24/7 rule should have gone and ended at WrestleMania 2000. I think the build-up to that match was fantastic. Match itself kind of sucked, but whatever. They told their story. They got out of there. And I feel like the 24/7 stuff should have ended there. But they kept it going for another 2 years. 2.5 years. And all it did was make the hardcore title into a complete joke. But in any case, we get this wild match between the Big Show and Shane McMahon where their partnership had dissolved. Big Show had turned face by this point and embraced his more entertainment-based personality where he was imitating people left and right. I talked about the Hulk Hogan match with Kurt Angle at the previous pay-per-view. But this was Big Show getting his revenge on Shane McMahon, or at least he thought he was going to. Turns out Shane McMahon's got money to throw around, and he was able to get a ton of people to come out and help him, including the Big Boss Man, Bull Buchanan, and TNA with Trish Stratus. Now, Trish Stratus, who I talked about at the previous pay-per-view, taking that table spot, was kind of her A Star Is Born moment. There's another one in this match that a lot of people forget about, but she took one of the scariest bumps I have ever seen in my life, ever, where Big Show picked her up and tossed her out of the ring, but it wasn't like the typical gorilla press where you toss her out, or tossing her in a way that's a way where she can at least, if something goes wrong, she can at least kind of break her fall. He picked her up where she's in kind of a sitting position and then threw her outside of the ring onto Tess and Albert, and I sat there watching this. I was like, oh my God, if they didn't catch her, that would have been a really bad landing. So props to her for being brave enough to take that fall, but it was the coolest visual of this match for sure. And but yeah, with all the massive outside interference and the use of a large speaker, Shane McMahon was able to trap Big Show's leg, get the win. He also used a cinder block to knock him out to get the win as well. So it was it took 5-6 people in a cinder block to beat the Big Show. But Shane McMahon got the win, and I think Big Show and Shane would have a few more matches. They would have one more the next year. Probably a year after this. I forget which pay. It was either Backlash or Judgment Day. I forget which one. But yeah, Big Show would lose that match too. I don't think Big Show ever beat Shane McMahon. I don't think he ever did. It was one of those weird things where it's Big Show just always lost to him. But this was also when Shane was doing the whole, which way did he go? Which way did he go? Ha, 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 ha. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I liked this version of Shane way more than the tough man persona that he would go on to adopt, where he could go toe-to-toe with all the wrestlers, beat them all up, and he's one of the toughest guys in wrestling. I like the wimpy, Shane's a pussy, he's a coward, throws his money around, runs away from a fight except when he has an advantage. That's the Shane McMahon I like because it's way more fun to watch him get beat up. Like, it's way more fun, and he's way more infuriating as a character in a good way, where it's like he's legitimately getting heat because he always cheats. Yeah, that's the Shane I always liked, and I don't know why they insist, every time they bring him back, they insist on making him one of the toughest guys in the room, which is, to me, antithetical to what Shane's strengths are as a performer and a character, but hey, what do I know? More. Okay, I'm looking ahead. We got more Gerald Brisco stuff. Already talked about that. There's also a brief interaction between Shawn Michaels and Triple H. Now, Shawn Michaels was the designated guest referee for the main event. And this is less than a year after the last time Shawn Michaels was a guest referee on the very first episode of SmackDown, where he deliberately helped Triple H defeat The Rock to retain the WWF Championship. And they formed that stable with Shane McMahon that went nowhere. I believe the name for it was like Corporation X, or I think that's the name that fans have given the name, Corporation X. It was supposed to be Shane, Triple H, China, and Shawn Michaels, but Shawn never appeared on TV again after that because of, Shawn Michaels, so they kind of dropped the stable. And but this is like Shawn's first major appearance since that show, so now there's doubts that he's going to screw The Rock once again, which plays into the main event a little bit. But be that as it may, we will talk more about that when I get into the main event. But next is the Intercontinental Championship, another pay-per-view encounter between Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. This one being a submissions match. Now, the match they had at Backlash was great. They would have another match at SummerSlam, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And their series of pay-per-view matches would ultimately culminate with an excellent ladder match at the Royal Rumble in 2001. And the recurring theme in all of their pay-per-view encounters is that Benoit always wins, Benoit always wins, Benoit always wins, until the ladder match where Jericho finally gets the win over Benoit. So they had a nice little feud and storyline going here, where Jericho just couldn't beat the guy until you get to the ladder match. And here, I think this one is one of the better matches that they had. This was an excellent, excellent match, I thought, with a memorable finish where Jericho was trapped into the crippler crossface, didn't submit until Benoit put the grasp underneath his neck, and he ended up choking Chris out and causing him to pass out. So Benoit once again got the win, and once again these two went out there and had a hard-hitting, great, fantastic match. Like I said, one of the better ones that they would have together. And it was just a terrific, terrific match. Sorry, I'm just looking ahead here. All right, next up we get a tables match between the Dudley Boys and what remains of D-Generation X, Road Dogg and X-Pac, with Tori in their corner, the Tori that nobody remembers, the not Tori Wilson. And this was probably the worst match on the show. I would say definitely. It was definitely the worst match on the show because this was a tables match that followed the tables match that we saw at the Royal Rumble earlier that year between the Dudleys and the Hardys, which was fantastic. Then you get to this one, and they're tagging in and out, and it's like, wait a minute, why would you tag in and out in a tables match? The whole point is, this should be like somewhat of a wild free-for-all, and this one is kind of a generic tag match with the occasional table thrown in. And this was also the point where DX was really wearing thin as a gimmick and as a stable. It just felt like it was done at this point. Like Triple H had moved on to bigger and better things. Billy Gunn was hurt. Chyna was doing her own thing, and Road Dogg and X-Pac just kind of felt like this sad, like grasping onto this thing for dear life. And it was made even worse by the fact that their level of intrigue was decreasing by the day, and yet they went over most of the time, like they did in this match. They ultimately went over here. Which to me is insane. Like, why the hell should they go over the Dudley Boys? The Dudley Boys should be killing them at this point, because who's the more interesting team? And they would go on to beat them at their next pay-per-view encounter as well, and it's like, what the fuck? Why are they going over the Dudley Boys? It just didn't make any sense to me. Excuse me. So yeah, DX had just really become a very uninteresting gimmick at this point in time. And yeah, I question the decision making here, but it was the one dark spot on an otherwise really solid string of matches at this pay-per-view. We get the wrap up to the Gerald Briscoe hardcore title stuff, which will set up the Patterson Briscoe match at the next pay-per-view. I will talk about that in a little bit. And then we get our long-ass main event, The Rock versus Triple H for the WWF Championship in an Iron Man match, 60-minute Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels as the guest referee. And I said before that there were doubts that The Rock and Triple H could go an hour and hold the audience's attention for that long. I'm happy to report that after watching this match again, the match holds up fantastically well. I think it's an excellent match. I think both guys played their roles beautifully. I think the match has a little bit of everything from straight up wrestling to wild brawling that you associate with the Attitude Era and just about everything else in between. I thought this match was absolutely stellar. And they also had the nice little thing going on where The Rock got the first win, but then after that, Triple H took over. Because I think the understanding was that Triple H would be better as the match got longer, being the more like polished wrestler of the two. And Rock was kind of playing catch up for the rest of the event. And every fall, the final score ended up being 6-5, but every fall felt like it mattered or felt impactful to the overall story being told. And the further ahead Triple H got, the more hopeless it looked for Rocky. And then every time Rock got a fall, whether it be that epic count-out spot that he did after he put him through the table and things like that, it was like, it felt like a breath of, just this relief that's like, oh my God, Rock can catch up. So I thought that this match was absolutely stellar. I thought both guys did an amazing job, and I think it's a testament to the chemistry and the abilities that both guys had that they could make this match work as well as it did for 59 minutes. The last minute is just a complete free-for-all with everybody interfering with the McMahon-Helmsley regime all getting involved. And then we get the return of The Undertaker. He had been gone since September of the previous year when he was doing his Ministry of Darkness bit. And actually, he was doing his tag team bit with Big Show at the time. He was supposed to be in the six-pack challenge at the September pay-per-view the year before, but ultimately dropped out due to injuries that The Undertaker was suffering, and he'd been off TV pretty much ever since. And now Undertaker's back, and it is the birth of the American Badass gimmick. Where he comes out on a motorcycle, they've got American Badass Kid Rock song playing, and the Undertaker character's been reinvented, but he comes back as a babyface and completely tears through McMahon and all of his forces before giving the tombstone to Triple H, which ultimately is seen by the referee Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels awards the final fall via disqualification to Triple H, making him the new WWF champion. So if you're keeping score, Rock won the title at Backlash, and then Triple H won it right back at Judgment Day. Now, this is, if I'm not mistaken, let me make sure I've got my counting right. So Triple H, he won the first title at the night after SummerSlam 99. And then they did the whole thing where Vince beat him for the title, and then he won the vacant title in September. And then he lost it at Survivor Series to Big Show, and then beat Big Show for the title in December, I think it was. And now he's winning the belt again here in May. So in less than a year, Triple H has had 4 championship reigns as champion. A lot of back and forth and playing musical chairs with the championships. It was a very different time, because I remember when Hogan won his 4th in 91, and this is 7 years after he'd won his first one, and that seemed like something that was unattainable. No one's ever going to match that, and here we are. Triple H, less than a year, he's already got 4. It was a crazy time to see that type of stuff, but but in any case, I thought Judgment Day, with the return of The Undertaker, a mostly stellar undercard, and an outstanding main event. I think Judgment Day was an absolutely fantastic show. One of the better shows of the year, and an easy A for me. I think it's a must-watch. I think top to bottom, there aren't as many pay-per-views either back then or today that are as good as this. I thought this was a completely stellar show, and showcased a lot of the best qualities of the Attitude Era and the characters involved in said era. I think Judgment Day was amazing, and it's definitely worth a look. Next, we go into a pay-per-view that's not quite as good. King of the Ring 2000. Now, the King of the Ring pay-per-view, it's always been a tournament-based pay-per-view, with the King of the Ring tournament being one of the major selling points, the major attraction of the pay-per-view since it was created in 1993. But very few of the King of the Ring pay-per-views I remember being that good. 93 is a really good one. 98 is a really good one. And that has nothing to do with the King of the Ring tournament. And then there's, 95 was a really bad one. 94 had Art Donovan. 96, except for the Austin promo, I barely remember it. And 97... I barely remember except for the Austin-Shawn match. It's, so not a lot of really good King of the Ring pay-per-views up to this point. Now, I think the 2001 and 2002 events were probably better than this one, but this one was more indicative of like what can go wrong when you do a tournament pay-per-view. Sometimes it can go very well, like Survivor Series 98 or King of the Ring 93. But this one is just kind of a mess, and just like some of the Battle Bowl events that WCW used to do. It's just, and it's funny, I've heard Eric Bischoff talk about why he doesn't like tournaments in wrestling. And he brings up some very good points, I feel, where it's like, you're there to see your favorites, and then you see them, and then you see them again later, and it's very difficult to get that same level of excitement back up again because you've already seen them. So that makes sense to me. The tournament concept is a very, very tricky one to do. And this is one that I don't think came off as well as it could have, mainly due to one major mistake that they made, which I'll elaborate on later. But we start off this show with the opening round. First match is former Intercontinental Champion Chris Benoit going up against the man that defeated him for the belt, Rikishi, and this was a quick match where Benoit quickly got disqualified and injured Rikishi, which would set up Rikishi as the injured babyface moving forward in the tournament. And this was just, that's pretty much all it was. It was just kind of like, oh, so that's how we're starting the tournament. Okay, fine. And it set up Rikishi to ultimately get to the finals, which I felt like, again, Rikishi was over. I'm not saying he wasn't. I'm not even going to argue with him being the Intercontinental Champion at this point, because he was massively over. I think it was a mistake to have him be the one to go all the way to the end of the tournament, and I'll explain why in a little bit. All right, then after that, we set up our main event storyline heading into the closer, where the bad guys are all doubting Vince McMahon's level-headedness heading into the main event, whether he's got a plan for the event tonight. Now, this main event was a strange one because it was a six-man tag. The Rock, The Undertaker, and Kane all taking on Triple H, Shane McMahon, and Vince McMahon, and Triple H's WWF Championship was on the line. Bit convoluted, bit silly for me. I am not a big fan of singles titles being defended in tag team matches, and there's another example of that at SummerSlam, which I'll get into later in this video. And I'm not a big fan of tag team championships being defended in singles matches, which I've seen a handful of times. It's, I'm just not a fan of it. And but I'll elaborate more in the main event as we get closer to that match. Next up in the King of the Ring tournament, we get the European champion Eddie Guerrero with China taking on the newly repackaged Val Venus with Trish Stratus as his manager. Now, the porn star gimmick was pretty much dropped at this point, and Val Venus was pretty much just a standard heel. Like, all the things that made him unique as a talent, they pretty much stripped that away and made him just a guy. And he would win the Intercontinental Championship not long after this, but it was I don't know, like, Val Venus, they were trying to push him and trying to make something out of him, but by dropping the porn star gimmick and giving him nothing except Trish as a manager, which is a plus because it means I get to see Trish more. But it's just, I don't know, he failed to connect after losing the porn star gimmick is basically what I'm trying to say. But he ultimately got the win here. I thought the match with Eddie was actually quite good. Pretty solid match between the two. I think Val was a really good worker and doesn't always get the credit for being a really good worker, but yeah, a little surprised that he got the win here because I would have felt like Eddie Guerrero was the more over talent at this point. But I guess when you look at the scenario, it's like, when you look at the brackets again, it's like, all right, you want faces to fight heels and so on and so forth. So it's like, all right, well, the winner of this is going to be facing Rikishi. So put the heel up against Rikishi. And this would set up Val and Rikishi for the Intercontinental title and a continued feud between Eddie and Val heading into SummerSlam that would involve China and the Intercontinental Championship. So there's layers to this. There's so many layers to this. So this was probably one of the few good tournament matches on this show. But anyway, we get to Pat Patterson looking for an evening gown dress for his match later, which is probably the sole bit of entertainment in this entire situation. I'll get there when we get there. And next up, we got the least interesting of the first round matches. Bull Buchanan versus Crash Holly, where Crash Holly was set up as the Cinderella guy, the surprise that made it to the second round. I was like, really? This is the best? Like, you got 4 matches for the opening round, and it's like, this is the best one you could come up with? Really? It's like, all right, I guess. But it is like they pretty much just washed past this match and gave Crash the win. It wasn't very good. Bit of a miss, but whatever. Crash gets the win. All right, and then Vince confronts Linda backstage, who says that she is going to ensure that there's no interference in the main event. This is, again, furthering build for the 6-man tag team main event. But next up is the final first-round match in the King of the Ring tournament. Chris Jericho versus Kurt Angle. Now, this should have been the finals, and this is where they kind of fucked up this tournament. Jericho and Angle were the two most over guys in the tournament, I felt, and I really, really felt like this should have been the finals. And unfortunately, because me and everybody else with half a brain felt that this match should have been the finals, it pretty much said whoever wins this match is going to win the tournament, which is ultimately what happened. So once this match happened and we had a winner, the rest of the tournament matches became superfluous because you just knew that the winner of this was going to win the whole thing. And it's a shame, too, because the match that they had was actually pretty damn good. It was Jericho and Angle having another really solid match with each other, following up the match that they had in February earlier this year. And we also got some interference from Stephanie McMahon, who would feud with Chris Jericho, setting up a match with Triple H at the next pay-per-view. And the whole scenario with Jericho winning the WWF Championship for Triple H, a thing that was completely stricken from the record books, and the budding love triangle between Kurt Angle, Triple H, and Stephanie McMahon, which will be a major storyline heading into SummerSlam and continuing for throughout the fall before petering out with no real conclusion. But I thought this match was very, very good, with Kurt Angle ultimately getting the win thanks to interference from Stephanie. And again, putting all those storyline components in place. I thought this match was very effective, but it's just a shame that it wasn't the finals. I really, really felt like this should have been the finals, but it wasn't. And like I said, it just made every single... It made every single tournament match that followed this feel superfluous. We also get a quick segment with Mick Foley over at WWF New York, hosting from there with Ivory as the bartender, which is like, that's a nice, sexy bartender. But anyway, this was kind of laying the seeds for Mick Foley being announced as the new commissioner, a role that had previously gone to Shawn Michaels, but he wasn't a TV regular anymore, so they were looking to get someone to fill Shawn Michaels' spot. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mick Foley would be announced as the commissioner the very next night on Raw. And would be in charge of the show for most of the rest of the year. So Mick Foley will be back in a non-wrestling capacity soon. All right, next up we get a 4-way tag team match for the WWF Tag Team Championship. The champions, Too Cool, okay, versus Edge and Christian, versus the Hardy Boys with Lita, versus Test and Albert with Trish Stratus. Oh boy, what to say about this? The match was good. It was an elimination style match. I think a lot of us would have preferred it if it was just Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys. But this match largely was a vehicle to continue a feud between Lita and Trish Stratus, and this was like the beginnings of their rivalry that would carry over for pretty much the rest of their careers in WWF, at least as regular competitors. Like, they would be, Trish's final match in the company would be against Lita in 2006. When I say final match, I mean the final match of her initial run. And it was, and that would yield some really good stuff, even in 2000, when Trish is still kind of a novice at this point and kind of learning the ropes. They would get some really good stuff out of them, as we'll see at the next pay-per-view. But here, I thought the match itself was fine. It was solid, a nice little piece of tag team action for most of the people involved. I cannot believe I've completely forgotten that Too Cool were tag team champions. But ultimately, when it was said and done, Edge and Christian would win back the tag team championships. And this would be, really like Edge and Christian really came into their own this year and were great. The one thing that kind of held them back is that they won the tag team championships 7 goddamn times in the span of less than a year, which to me is just crazy. Like, how can you switch around the tag team championship that much? It's just, it's really hard to get the belts to matter when they're changing hands so frequently. But in any case, this match was fine for what it was. All right, next up, we're into the semifinals round of the King of the Ring tournament. Rikishi defeated Val Venus to the shock of no one. And but Val Venus furthered the injuries to Rikishi's shoulder, sending him up to be super, super duper injured in the finals. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, Kurt Angle defeated Crash Holly in what was probably the worst match of the tournament. Well, actually, no, I'd say Bull and Crash was the worst match of the tournament. Here, Angle pretty much destroyed Crash to set up the finals of Kurt Angle facing an injured Rikishi. But as we move right along into what is the most notorious match from this show, Pat Patterson defending the Hardcore Championship against Gerald Brisco in an evening gown match. Now, this is one of those things where it started off kind of funny, especially with Pat Patterson's entrance. Gerald Brisco was not having it and looked absolutely hilarious in his dress because he put no effort into it. But Pat Patterson put way too much effort into it, and that made it kind of funny. So the entrances, I guess, were funny, but then the bell rang, and it was one of the worst matches I have ever seen in my entire life. It was just gross and stupid, and the crowd turned on it too. It was really, really, really bad, and probably the worst pay-per-view match of the year for WWF at this time. It was pretty bad. I mean, this is some Russo level shit that I would have expected to see in WCW at this time, but this was absolutely terrible. The match ended with Crash Holly doing a run-in and enforcing the 24/7 rule to steal the Hardcore Championship back and once again making himself the Houdini of Hardcore as he gets another Hardcore Championship run out of this absolute dumpster fire of a match. Next up, we had a match I alluded to earlier, the Handicap Tables and Dumpsters match, the Dudley Boys taking on Road Dogg, Tori, and X-Pac. Now, the rules were X-Pac and Road Dogg and Tori. DX had to win by putting the Dudleys in a dumpster, and the Dudley Boys had to win by putting all three members of DX through a table. For some bizarre reason, the Dudley Boys lost this match. I don't understand. Like in mid 2000, there's no reason for X-Pac and Road Dogg to be going over the Dudley Boys on pay-per-view. I'm sorry. This was just a baffling decision to me. And the whole point was, again, like I talked about in Backlash, the whole point was like, all right, they're building up to the Dudley Boys putting the heel woman through a table, which they did with Trish. Here, Tori actually successfully put them through a table on an episode of Raw where she did a diving splash onto one of them. I believe it was Bubba. So now they wanted revenge on her, and they were going to put her through a table. And ultimately, the Dudley Boys did not succeed while the match was in progress. They were thrown into the dumpsters, lost. But post-match, they got their hands on Tori and put her through the table. And that was that. Match, I guess it was okay for what it was, but I'm just baffled that DX in any universe would win this match. To me, it was a no-brainer that the Dudleys should have won this. They should have won at Judgment Day, and they should have won this match. I guess if you're going to do 2 pay-per-view matches in a row, I guess it's okay to have the heels win the first one, but I guess DX, they were just so uninteresting at this point that it's like, why are they doing multiple pay-per-view matches with one of the most over teams in the company? I don't get it, but it was fine, whatever. Tori got put to the table post-match, whatever, but again, it was what it was. And then we get the King of the Ring tournament finals with Kurt Angle defeating the injured Rikishi to become the King of the Ring. The finish was cool, where Angle hit a super belly-to-belly suplex on Rikishi from the top rope to win the match. That was cool. Other than that, it was predictable. We all knew Angle was going to win. Whoever won Jericho Angle was going to win the tournament, and sucked any drama or life out of the tournament or this match. So, Angle won, which is good for him. It's his biggest win of his career up to this point. So again, like I've talked about earlier, the whole where are they going with Kurt? What's his momentum and all that other stuff? Here, once again, it's he gets 3 straight wins on a pay-per-view after losing 3 pay-per-views in a row. So I guess they're making up for lost time. I don't know. But Kurt Angle understandably wins the King of the Ring tournament. Was the best choice to win. I just wish the match with Jericho was saved for the finals. I think that would have been much better. Alrighty, and then we get the main event. The 6-man tag team match that the concept of which I'm not a fan of, as I've said before. But with all of that said, I think that this match was fun for what it was. Like, it was actually kind of entertaining to watch this. Mainly because the bad guys, Triple H, Vince, and Shane, are at a distinct disadvantage on paper. But when you put the WWF Championship on the line, Kane, Undertaker, and Rock are going to start fighting with each other over who gets to get the pin, which played into the finish as Kane almost dropped the ball for his team by being selfish and breaking up the Rock's pins to get in there. But I think this match is probably most known for a spot where Shane climbed to the top rope and Undertaker grabbed him by the throat. And Undertaker then gave him like a flinging choke slam from the top rope all the way to the announce table. An amazing visual. That looks great. A move that's so cool. I believe they worked it into the SmackDown video game that came out that year. It's a cool looking move and a great visual for the match. What ended up happening as things kind of turned into utter chaos as the match was in progress, Vince got trapped alone with The Rock and ultimately got rock bottomed and people's elbowed into oblivion, and Rock won back the WWF Championship without beating the champion. It was one of the reasons I'm not a fan of the 6-man, defending a singles title in a tag team match, because it's like the champion loses the belt without getting pinned, and I'm not a fan of like the belts being defended in triple threats and 4-ways either. Generally speaking, it's just like generally if you're going to switch a title, I feel like the champion should get beat. That's just my whole thing. So, and once again, we've got Rock and Triple H playing ping pong with the WWF Championship. This will be the last change for a while until No Mercy. So we get some stability with Rock as champion, thank goodness. But King of the Ring. This is the worst pay-per-view of the year, probably. It's either this or WrestleMania, and I'm more inclined to go with this one because WrestleMania at least has the Triangle Ladder match, which is an all-time classic, and this show does have some good matches in it, like Angle and Jericho, but the construction of the tournament itself was just a complete and utter mess. And the main event, on a conceptual level, is one that I'm not overly fond of, even though the match did have its fun moments. And then you had that god-awful evening gown match. This pay-per-view sucked, quite honestly. I tried to find nice things to say about it, but now that I'm reviewing it and I'm reliving it and seeing it out loud, I was like, man, this one was not great. But fortunately, they would bounce back very strongly with the next pay-per-view in July. Next up, we go to what might be my favorite pay-per-view of the year for the WWF. Fully Loaded 2000. Now, Fully Loaded is a pay-per-view name that started being used in 1998. They used it again in 99, but this would be the final Fully Loaded. Next year's July pay-per-view would be the Invasion pay-per-view, and the Fully Loaded name would never return. But honestly, I mean, you look at that, it's a very underrated string of pay-per-views, because I thought the 98 Fully Loaded was very, very good overall and continued the storylines heading into a huge SummerSlam event in 1998. 1999 had the infamous First Blood match with Undertaker and Steve Austin. That was the end of the Austin McMahon storyline, pretty much for good. They would revisit it in brief spurts here and there, but that was really the culmination of Austin McMahon permanently, ending what is arguably the greatest storyline in company history. And then this event, top to bottom, just an excellent card all around. It was built around the triple main event, the first ever triple main event. Kurt Angle versus The Undertaker, Triple H versus Chris Jericho in a last man standing match, and the main event of The Rock versus Chris Benoit with the WWF Championship on the line. And if The Rock gets disqualified, he will lose the championship. So, which is a rarity for the Attitude Era, because normally the main events in the Attitude Era were complete free-for-alls, and disqualifications were, like, verboten, basically. So, it was very interesting to have that stipulation in place. But Fully Loaded 2000 took place in Dallas, Texas, the Reunion Arena, and was on July 23rd of the year 2000. Now, starting off, we had the 6-person intergender tag team match, the Hardy Boys and Lita, Team Extreme taking on TNA, Tess and Albert with Trish Stratus. I believe if I've got my math right, this is Trish Stratus's first ever pay-per-view match. And it might be the first pay-per-view match for Lita too. I'm trying to remember. That might be her first pay-per-view match as well, at least in the WWF. And I'll be honest, I thought this was a fantastic match. Great opener that had the tag team action from the two tag teams, Hardys and Tess and Albert, and the women provided so much flavor and so much excitement to this match. Because they were hot. Trish was absolutely gorgeous back then. But also, like, the action involved in the stuff that they did made for a lot of fun. They did a lot of, my friends and I back then, we used to call them the triple-double spots, where it would be like the Hardys and Lita would do triple-double DDTs and triple-double suplexes, where the three of them would team up on suplexes and DDTs. And it made for great visuals and very kind of unique for these type of matches. Lita even performed a superplex on Trish at this point. So Trish is starting to improve at this point, and not quite to the level that she would get to in her peak years, but certainly it's like there's signs of a great talent in there, and she continues to improve leaps and bounds. And I thought this match was a stellar hot opener, probably the best opener of the year. I'm trying to think of one that would match up to it, at least for WWE pay-per-views. I don't know, maybe if one comes around and future ones. But I thought this was a very exciting match that did a fantastic job of showing off the talents involved. The Hardy Boys and Lita would get the win, but Trish would get the last word as she would whip Lita with the belt post-match, continuing their feud. And their feud would continue for years and years until they would ultimately main event an episode of Raw in the year 2004, was it? I think it was 2004 was when they had their main event on Raw. One of the best matches for both women. I thought that match was amazing. And this was just everything you want out of an opener. It was hot. It was action-packed. Got everybody excited and showcased everybody involved in an amazing way. I thought that this was great. Now, this pay-per-view has a ton of backstage segments. I noticed that because there's a lot of different storylines going on throughout the course of the night. There's really, like, I guess we'll call it like an A story, a B story, and a C story. And maybe even a D story. There's the Chris Benoit Rock situation, which would get an in-ring segment later in the show. I'll cover that later. And then you would have the Undertaker running around the arena looking for Kurt Angle, wanting to get revenge on him because Kurt Angle had messed up his motorcycle, setting up their match for the show. And Undertaker basically spent most of the night hunting down Kurt Angle. But then you get another element of this where Stephanie McMahon is backstage and she's receiving flowers from a unknown source, but the card reads, it's true, making Triple H think that it's Kurt Angle sending the flowers. And then ultimately it's revealed to be Chris Jericho who was luring Triple H into a trap so he could attack him before their last man standing match and get some level of revenge against Triple H. And then there's the storyline involving Edge and Christian where they're trying to back down out of their tag team championship match against the Acolytes, the APA. And they did so, and they tried to do so by saying that Christian was sick. And they were trying to trick Mick Foley into thinking that Christian was really sick. Ultimately, it's revealed that they were lying. Mick Foley was able to see past the ruse, and ultimately they would have to go and defend their tag team titles. But yeah, it was a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of stories. Some people might see this as a criticism, that they're basically turned their pay-per-view into an episode of Raw with all these storylines going on throughout the night. But I thought it made the show more exciting because it put matches into doubt. It added a little bit of extra spice to the matches coming up and made them a little bit more exciting and made me anticipate them a little bit more. And man, they got a lot into this show when you look at it. You look at the different matches they had and all these different backstage segments to tell all these stories. They really made every second count. And they had a lot of stuff going on here. I mean, it would have been easy for the show to become an over-bloated mess, but I thought almost everything came off really, really well. Next up was one of the least exciting matches on the show, Al Snow versus Taz, who had returned shortly before this event, returned from injury, and it basically turned heel, and now he was doing a bully gimmick where he was just randomly interfering with matches and attacking people. This would ultimately lead to a feud with Jerry Lawler that would leave Taz out in the dirt, basically. So any hopes of Taz becoming like a main event star that there were at the Royal Rumble earlier this year were pretty much dead at this point. Al Snow also, his major intrigue had kind of faded by this point, so this kind of felt like a nothing match. A match was okay for what it was. For an undercard, low-card match, it was fine. Second match on the show, fine. Taz gets a win in a somewhat quick match to kind of help establish him for this new direction for his character. Okay, that's all fine. But that's all this match was. It was just fine. Then we had the European Championship match. Eddie Guerrero with Chyna defending his title against Perry Saturn with Terry Runnels, a couple that would stay together for, I guess, for the next year or so until Perry Saturn would start dating a mop. Okay. But, yeah, this match was pretty solid. Again, I've put over the abilities of both Eddie and Perry Saturn multiple times, and this match was another indicator of that. I thought it was a really, really solid match, with the women at ringside having a little bit of extra flavor to the match as well. Terry, of course, is absolutely no match for Chyna. That was made clear in 1997, and it's made clear here as well. But Eddie Guerrero retains his title, and the Latino Heat couple of Chyna and Eddie are basically baby faces at this point, although this wouldn't last long once Chyna's Playboy would come into fruition. And kind of run rampant on their relationship. But it's right now things are looking high for Latino Heat, and they'd gotten pretty over as a couple. And like I said before, I think the Latino Heat gimmick really kind of helped Eddie get his foot in the door with WWF and helped him establish himself to the WWF audience. So even though he ended up leaving the company due to his various personal demons a year later, when he came back, it made him a bit of a commodity that the WWF would want to bring back once he got himself straightened out. And I think in the long run, I think this stuff with China was very good for him. But next match is the WWF Tag Team Championship match. Like I said, Edge and Christian tried to back out of it. They did not want to go up against the Acolytes, mainly because the Acolytes are violent bruisers, and who wants that, right? And because the show was in Texas, Bradshaw was a major babyface coming into this thing. And the match was short but explosive, and it was fun in the short amount of time that we got. The match ended with a disqualification, which I thought was great for Edge and Christian. They get themselves disqualified to save their titles, which I think is perfect for a team like Edge and Christian. They're a slimy, weaselly heel team, and they should be winning matches by disqualification when they're clearly outmatched like they were here. I thought everything about this, Bradshaw didn't have to take a loss in Texas, and Edge and Christian saved their titles, so I think that this was booked about as well as it could possibly be, and made Edge and Christian somewhat stronger. And it was nice to not have a title change on pay-per-view for once with the tag titles. They actually kept the titles on Edge and Christian for a while. What constitutes a while in 2000 as far as the tag team championship is concerned. Okay, catching up. Next up is what turned out to be the sleeper hit of the show. Val Venus defending the Intercontinental Championship against Rikishi in a steel cage match. Now, they would do a lot of steel cage matches, like a handful at some of the next few pay-per-views this year. Some would say they would even overuse the steel cage match. But this one, it was fine. And like I said before, Val Venus had trouble connecting with the audience once they dropped the porn star element to his character. But this match surpassed any and all expectations I think anybody had of it, and really showcased the talents of both men involved. They were able to go out there and have a nice, bloody match that was kind of had that old school blood and guts type of feel to it of a classic steel cage match, and had some memorable moments like Lita coming back down and whipping Trish Stratus to get revenge for what happened earlier in the show. I love stuff like that. Keeps continuity, and sometimes if somebody's showing up on the show multiple times, to me, and if they have a conflict with somebody in segment 1 that they appear in, to me, not having some kind of follow-up in segments like 2 or 3 is weird, and it feels like a break from continuity. But that's not the case here. They brought Lita out to keep her story going with Trish, and also keep her out of interfering in this cage match, which ended up being damn good, and was punctuated by the amazing spot of the super heavyweight Rikishi climbing up, scaling to the top of the cage, and jumping off the top to flatten Val Venus, which should have given him the win. Did not, because as Rikishi tried to exit, Taz smashed the camera into it, grabbed the cameraman's camera and smashed the camera into Rikishi's face, leading to Val Venus ultimately retaining his title and setting himself up to drop the belt at SummerSlam. There was some hot potatoing going on with the Intercontinental title as well, but fortunately there was no title change here. This is like one of the forgotten gems of the Attitude Era. And again, you look at this card, you have a triple main event, you have a lot of star power in that regard, you had a really hot opener, and this match is one of the best matches on the card. It's something that came in with, I don't want to say low expectations, but it wasn't one of the major attractions coming in. It just felt like, even though it was a steel cage match, it just felt like something they did just to give Rikishi a spot on the card, but it ended up being one of the best matches on the show. And if you have not checked out the steel cage match between Rikishi and Val Venus, I highly recommend it. It's, like I said, it's a bit of a sleeper hit. But then after that, we start the triple main event. First one being Kurt Angle and The Undertaker. Now, This one is by far the weakest of the triple main event, of the 3 main event matches. And it concludes the storyline of Undertaker like chasing Kurt Angle around, and Angle like getting sneak attacks on the Undertaker's knee and things like that. And Undertaker finally getting his hands on the little pipsqueak that's been bugging him. Undertaker had been chasing Angle around all night, and for his entrance, Kurt Angle actually came out holding a wrench and looking over his shoulder looking for Undertaker, which was pretty cool, and that they were keeping up with all the backstage segments that they had done earlier in the show. But the match itself was fine. Angle tried to gain an advantage by attacking Undertaker's leg, but it was all for naught as he was ultimately put away with the last ride. The Angle kind of got chewed up and spit out here, which again, the lack of consistency with how Kurt Angle has been promoted here, gets destroyed in January, wins a belt in February, loses both belts in March, and then has lost every match up until June, where he wins the King of the Ring tournament, and then the first pay-per-view after King of the Ring, the biggest win of his career, he's losing. Granted, it's to Undertaker, and he's working with Undertaker. It just feels weird that Angle is just being chewed up and spit out like this again on pay-per-view, when this is supposed to be like the best rookie year in WWE history. So it's, Angle was not always booked well, but again, I think the level of promotion that they gave him, regardless of his wins and losses, and the fact that Angle's character shined through so well and was able to get over, particularly with the love triangle, which I'll talk about more when I talk about SummerSlam. But, there were other elements that got Angle over beyond his wins and losses, which is, is great when you can do it. Most often, but, you give most other guys like that type of wins and losses on pay-per-view, that would probably kill him. But with Angle, he was able to persevere and become a Hall of Fame level star. So good on him. But next up was my favorite match on the show. One of my favorite Triple H matches of all time. One of my favorite Chris Jericho matches of all time. The last man standing match between these two rivals that centered around Jericho mocking Stephanie McMahon, Triple H's wife, and the infamous Raw segment where Jericho won the title and the win was erased from history. So it culminates here with an excellent last man standing match. I'll even go as far to say the best last man standing match of all time. It's a gimmick match that I'm normally not that excited about because, as I've said before, it's easy to kind of settle into this pattern of do a spot, count to 10, do a spot, count to 10, do a spot, count to 10. I remember feeling the Triple H Orton last man standing matches, they had more than one, kind of settled into that. I remember thinking Batista and Undertaker, when they had their last man standing match, it was kind of like that. And but this one actually felt like a old school style NWA blood and guts style war with Jericho working through injured ribs to kind of get an advantage over Triple H, doing his best DDP impression to sell the rib injury, and it looked like Triple H had the advantage, especially with Stephanie at ringside, but Jericho was ultimately able to come from behind and make more of a match out of it, and this was a bloody, wild match, and really Jericho's best match in the WWF up to this point. And Triple H, who had a MVP level year in 2000, I would argue that this is probably his best match in a year that included the street fight with Cactus Jack and various matches with The Rock. I mean, that were also stellar. Triple H was like untouchable this year. Like, this is like one of the best years in the history of wrestling for any one superstar. Like, people talk about Ric Flair's 1989, which was stellar and obviously a great year for him, and some of the other AJ Styles at various points of his career has had excellent years, but Okada is another one. But 2000 Triple H, it's hard to find a time where a wrestler had a better year than Triple H did in 2000 with the level of work and the level of matches that he was able to have. This match was stellar. Jericho was ultimately defeated after both men went through a table. Triple H put Jericho through the table and both men were down. Triple H stood up at 10 and, as JR said, was down at 11. He immediately fell down. But Triple H got the win, which made sense here, but Jericho got an excellent pay-per-view showcase, and I think this really did help him in the long run. Next up, we got the main event, which was I talked about an in-ring segment that they had earlier in the show, which they did with all the action going on. They actually managed to have time for an in-ring segment where Shane McMahon challenged The Rock to come to the ring, and when he did, Chris Benoit was backstage destroying The Rock's clothing in his locker room to add a little bit more spice to the main event. Probably unnecessary, but in any case, the stage was set for this main event match where if Rock was disqualified, he would lose the title, which ensured a pure wrestling match for the main event, which was exceedingly rare in the Attitude Era, but we got it here. And I thought The Rock and Benoit had an absolutely stellar match. I thought this was an excellent match where Benoit did not look out of place at all working with The Rock. Benoit's one of those guys, again, not the flashiest personality, not the best on the mic, but he can work with just about anybody. And he proved that here, where he didn't look out of place working with Rock. And I thought Rock put on his working boots here. You know, it's easy for a guy like Rock to kind of settle into, like, I'll just do my shtick, and that's all I need to do. But no, he matched Benoit hold for hold, and it was an excellent, excellent match. And there was some of the sports entertainment aspect added in as well, with Shane McMahon's involvement being in Chris Benoit's corner. And this was this was one of my more favorite main events of the year for the WWF. I'm trying to think of ones. I like it more than the Rumble match. I liked it probably more than the No Way Out Hell in a Cell. Definitely more than the 4-Way. Probably more than Rock and Triple H, April and May, even though both matches were great. Definitely more than the 6-man tag. And yeah, this is pretty high up there. Probably my favorite pay-per-view main event that the WWF put on this year. It was fresh, it was exciting, and it was actually like a pure wrestling match in a time period where the tendency was to go for more wild, out of control type of matches, which are fun in their own way and have a place. But it was nice to see something that was a little bit more restrained and still excellent. What this match is probably most well known for is the false finish where Rock was unfairly disqualified. He was basically framed and the referee was tricked into thinking Rock utilized a steel chair. Not the case, but it looked like there was a disqualification, and Chris Benoit almost walked out with the WWF Championship. They even made the announcement and made it look like Benoit was the champion, but Commissioner Mick Foley came out and reversed his decision based on what he saw and knew that Rock didn't do anything to warrant a disqualification, and the match was restarted with The Rock ultimately getting the win. So Rock successfully defends the WWF Championship in a wild and exciting match with a pulse-pounding false finish that at the time tricked me. I was like, oh my God, Benoit just won the title. And it didn't last, but it was very, very exciting and great stellar end to the pay-per-view. So Fully Loaded 2000 really, this show is so loaded. I mean, that's fully lives up to the Fully Loaded name that the show has. When you look at the action-packed opener, the steel cage match, the last man standing match, the Rock and Benoit match in the main event, and then all of the little backstage segments that they did to set up stories for all of those other matches and keep intrigue on those things. This show was absolutely stellar from top to bottom. And again, no wasted motion. WWF made every second count, and it was an exciting show from start to finish, and probably my favorite pay-per-view of the year. So, Fully Loaded 2000, it's one that I think probably gets it tends to get overlooked because it's not one of the big 5 or 4. It's not one of the big name pay-per-views, and Fully Loaded is even something like a Judgment Day, where Judgment Day at least had like a long string of being used, or Backlash, which has a long string of being used. Fully Loaded was only used 3 times, so it's easy to even forget that the show even existed because the name didn't stick around. But it's definitely worth checking out. So highly recommended for me. This is an easy A on the grading scale for me. Fully Loaded 2000 was an absolutely stellar pay-per-view. All right, let's wrap part 2 up with SummerSlam 2000. Taking place in Raleigh, North Carolina, and another one of the big 5 pay-per-views, the biggest pay-per-view of the summer, as WWE has gone on to label it as. And it's only fitting that for a year as great as 2000 was for the WWE, that SummerSlam would be explosive and exciting as well. And that was certainly the case, especially with the main event storyline, with The Rock defending the WWE Championship, WWF Championship at the time, against Triple H and Kurt Angle, both of whom, Triple H and Kurt Angle, were involved in a love triangle with one Stephanie, which reached a fever pitch on the go-home SmackDown right before the pay-per-view when Kurt Angle planted a big fat wet one on Stephanie. And her loyalties were called into question, and it added a lot more intrigue into this pay-per-view. And would The Rock survive as champion? Well, let's find out. We opened up with a video package with voiceover from Classy Freddie Blassie with operatic music. One of the better pay-per-view opening packages that they did this year. Very, very cool. Always great to hear Freddie Blassie's voice. And the first match of the show involves Right to Censor, a group formed by one Steven Richards, whose goal was to completely censor the raunchier elements of the WWE, WWF at the time. The group at this point comprised of Steven Richards, Bull Buchanan, and formerly the Godfather, now the Good Father, rejecting his life as a pimp and dropping all the hoes, and now he is the Good Father, wearing a suit, white shirt, black pants, and a tie, as all of the Right to Censor members wore. Val Venus would eventually join the group as well, and Ivory, who would probably get the most success out of anybody in the group, as she would win the women's title out of it and go on to WrestleMania to face Chyna in what was ultimately a squash, but it was a big angle for her regardless. And in this opening match, they took on Rikishi and Too Cool, who seem to be somewhat of a standard for opening matches in WWF pay-per-views this year. But anyway, you had a group that was really, really over in Rikishi and Too Cool, and you had a group that was really, really hated because they wanted to censor everything. And a reason for them to want to censor Rikishi is that big fat ass that he's always showing off. So to that end, the match worked well enough because the crowd was red hot for everybody involved. They booed the heels, they cheered the faces, and to that end, it was fine. A bit short and basically a typical Too Cool Rikishi formula, or what would be known as the typical Rikishi Too Cool formula, where it's all about hitting the stink face, it's all about hitting the worm, and all that other stuff. So this was a fairly typical match, but because everybody involved was so over, it worked fine. Nice hot opener with Right to Censor getting the win. They actually protected them for a while. They were huge heat getters at the time, so they won most of their matches until they were ultimately dropped in 2001. But it was match was okay. And also Rikishi and Too Cool had a couple of the Godfather's hoes with them at ringside. One of them being a young Victoria, who would go on to be a women's champion, would go on to be paired up with Steven Richards at one point, heading into WrestleMania 19, and would have a fairly successful career as an in-ring competitor, both in WWE and TNA. So interesting to see, one of those before they were stars type of moments here with her. And then moving right along, again, this kind of like what I talked about with Fully Loaded, we get a bunch of backstage segments building into the main event. The big one being Kurt Angle pursuing Stephanie constantly and trying to talk to her and make his intentions clear, but never really getting the chance throughout the show. There's one really, really funny one, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it was, we also get Shane McMahon being chased by his opponent, Steve Blackman. Shane McMahon had won the hardcore title, and Blackman had become kind of the king of the hardcore division, the lethal weapon, just beating the crap out of everybody. So he was chasing Shane McMahon around until their title match happened later in the show. But that moves us right along to I guess you would call this match kind of the end of DX. The McMahon Helmsley faction had kind of like phased out DX little by little. and Road Dogg and X-Pac were tag team partners and were having a friendly rivalry at this point to see who was better. And this was kind of the end of DX because the match ended with Road Dogg ultimately beating the crap out of X-Pac and basically putting the group on ice for good. And kind of like DX had just really petered out by this point, so this just kind of feels like a sad, wet fart of an ending. Match itself was okay, I guess. Kind of short. X-Pac got the win with a low blow, and the X Factor beating Road Dogg. And X-Pac would go on to have a couple of matches with Jericho. Road Dogg would go on to form a tag team with K-Quick before ultimately being released at the beginning of the year. And X-Pac would later go on to form his own group, X Factor, which had minimal success. So it's kind of a sad ending for DX because this is the end of the glory days for both guys, it seems. Then we have the Intercontinental Championship match, which I've talked about earlier, how I don't like singles titles being defended in tag team matches, and we get another example of it here with a mixed tag team match. Val Venus, the Intercontinental Champion, defending his title with Trish Stratus as his partner, going up against Eddie Guerrero and Chyna. Now, while I don't like a singles title being defended in a tag team match, I think if you're going to do that, I think this match turned out to be about as well as it possibly could. Obviously, Val Venus was in a bit of a mismatch here with Chyna and Eddie Guerrero being able to compete with him legitimately and Trish being the obvious weak link, as she is clearly no match for Chyna in this situation. So he was trying desperately to keep Trish out of the ring at all costs. And once she wound up getting tagged in and Chyna got her hands on Trish, it was all she wrote. And Chyna basically demolished Trish and got the Intercontinental title, winning her second Intercontinental Championship. Well, there was also I guess third, because she was co-Intercontinental Champions with Chris Jericho at one point. So, more hot potatoing with the Intercontinental title belt. And this is the point where things would start to go south for Eddie and Chyna and their relationship, especially once the Playboy stuff started kicking in. But I thought this match was fun. I thought this was a nice, fun match. Again, not a huge fan of doing a title change in this type of match. But for what it was, I thought it was a pretty solid, fun match that the crowd just ate up. And again, Trish Stratus playing her part and developing into something special, taking the loss here for her team, but ultimately her getting beat up by Chyna was the thing that the crowd wanted out of it, and they got it, so it worked. Then we've got our next match up. Jerry the King Lawler versus Taz. Now, I mentioned in my Fully Loaded review that Taz had changed his character into a bit of a bully that would randomly interfere in matches. And that would continue until he started targeting Jerry the King Lawler and Jim Ross, the commentators. Now, this would ultimately harm Taz big time as he would take the loss here, so you have Taz losing to an announcer thanks to interference from the other announcer, because it has that memorable bit where JR took the candy dish and smashed it over Taz's head while he had the Taz mission on Jerry Lawler. The match was, I guess, entertaining for the people that were, excited about it. I personally wasn't a huge fan of Taz being just losing to an announcer. I think that was the wrong way to go. He would get his win back at the next pay-per-view, but why is Taz getting beat by an announcer? That's not a good way to promote somebody. And any chance that Taz had of becoming like a big level star in WWF were basically snuffed out by this point, I feel like. This was kind of the end of him. But this angle did kind of save Taz's job, too, because in the course of feuding with the announcers, he became an announcer himself and would stick around within the WWF for quite a while, almost a decade, I believe. So in a weird way, it killed him as a wrestler, but gave him a steady job in the company for a long time as well. So, 6 eggs in one, half a dozen in the other, I guess. All right, then we get one of the major highlights of the show as Shane McMahon defended the Hardcore Championship against Steve Blackman in a very memorable match, because Shane McMahon is an absolute lunatic and took a hell of a fall where basically the entire match was worked around Steve Blackman chasing Shane. Again, this is the version of Shane that I like. Shane went into his usual tricks and got outside interference, namely Test and Albert, to help him through, but Steve Blackman, being the lethal weapon, was able to fight through all of that and chase Shane around some more. They ended up climbing up the side of the stage, which was like 40 feet off the ground, I think, 35, 40, something along those lines. And in one of the scariest visuals in company history, and yes, it looked like that Shane landed into a crash pad, but come on, that's still a scary fall to be taking. And so Shane gets knocked off the top of it, landing into the little crash pad area that they had set up. But still a scary visual, and even scarier than that is that Steve Blackman started to climb down and then decided, fuck it. And then does a flying leg drop onto Shane from his high position up there. It's like, dude, if he landed on Shane wrong, that could have been really, really bad. So overall, scary visual, but it came off well, and it made the match exceedingly memorable, and one of the more memorable bumps in company history. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a higher fall than the one that Shane's infamous jump off the Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania 32. So Shane, he loves to jump about. He loves to jump off of high things for some reason. That's a thing that he loves to do. A bit of a daredevil. But this also led to one of the funniest parts of the show, as they cut backstage to show Stephanie freaking out, because it's like, you think your brother's dead after taking a fall like that, and she starts freaking out. Kurt walks in there to go talk to her, but she's too preoccupied with Shane. And she was like, is Shane okay? Is Shane okay? And Kurt's like, oh yeah, Shane's fine. I think he just got the wind knocked out of him. It's just, Kurt Angle was so great. Kurt was just so great. But, ultimately his attempts to get closer to Stephanie are broken up by Mick Foley, who takes Stephanie off to go check on Shane. And that is the end of that. But we move on to a 2 out of 3 falls match between Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. No Intercontinental title involved, but another pay-per-view outing between these two. And this is yet another very good match between them. Not as good as the submission match that they had at Judgment Day, but still a very, very, very good match. Well wrestled between everybody involved. And you expect nothing less from these two. And ultimately, Benoit would win the match once again with a cheap holding of the bottom rope to maintain a pinfall for his second fall, getting the win. Once again, Benoit and Jericho had amazing chemistry, and the pay-per-view matches they had were very good. And again, I won't be covering Royal Rumble 2001 in this series. Maybe I'll cover it at some other point. But the ladder match they ended up having that paid off the feud in January of the next year was excellent, and one of the best ladder matches of all time. So I highly recommend checking that one out as well. All right, next up is what I think is most people's match of the night on this particular show. The first ever tables, ladders, and chairs match between the teams of Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, and the Dudley Boys, with the Tag Team Championship on the line. And they pretty much continue where they left off at WrestleMania 2000, that amazing spectacle that they had there. They continued right along here with the type of spots and falls that you expect out of a TLC match, but it was the first ever. And it was historic in that regard. And up there, and again, I think I like this one more than the WrestleMania 17 match. I know everybody likes the WrestleMania 17 match more. I'm not entirely sure why. I think this one was far better and way more exciting, and did a better job of selling the spots too. Like whenever somebody would have a big fall, they would stay down. And it's interesting, Edge and Christian got the win here as they won the WrestleMania 2000 match, and they would win again at WrestleMania 17. And I've kind of looked at it, and it's like, Edge and Christian, yeah, they have their falls, but they aren't typically the ones that are getting slammed through 4 tables or doing swantons off the top of the ladder or things like that. So the high level bumps that they take are less than everybody else involved in the match. So it makes sense that they would win these matches because they take less of the daredevil bumps. Interesting. I don't know if that was intended, but it's something that I've kind of noticed where it's like Edge and Christian are not as involved in the truly scary spots, like the Dudleys and the Hardys are. There were, again, this is a very historic match and one that's worth going back and looking at. And it might be my favorite of the matches that these three teams had. I don't know. I really like the WrestleMania 2000 one too. But excellent match all around. Definitely the highlight of the show. Next up, we get the not highlight of the show, but another continuation from WrestleMania 2000. The Cat versus Terry Runnels. Cat had Al Snow in her corner. Terry Runnels had Perry Saturn in a thong stink face match, where the goal of the match was for the winner to rub their butt in the face of their opponent. This is the Attitude Era. This is definitely Attitude Era. Now, granted, the Cat was hot. Terry Runnels was hot. I'm never going to be opposed to seeing them run around in skimpy outfits. Not my style, but when the goal of the match is to stick your ass in somebody's face, it's like it just immediately comes off as stupid to me, and not worth being too excited about. To me, the most memorable part of the match was after it was over, the Cat got the win by rubbing her butt in Terry's face, and Al Snow kind of hoisted her up in victory and then flipped her around to where he was had his face in her pussy, and I was like, that's interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, this was kind of this is one of those this is an example of what it was like during that time, and it wasn't great. It wasn't great, but it's the type of match you expected to see during this time period. So whatever. Next up, we have a match that never really started: The Undertaker versus Kane. They had randomly out of nowhere turned Kane heel again, and had him attack Undertaker. Apparently, the original plan was Undertaker versus Big Show, but Big Show had was taken off TV, I believe, to go get some additional training and to get himself back into shape. So that match, my understanding is that the match was canceled, and they kind of rushed another Undertaker-Kane match onto this pay-per-view. Undertaker-Kane as a pairing was nowhere near as interesting as it was 2 years earlier. I actually, at this point, closer to 2.5 years earlier. This just kind of felt like something that was thrown under the card just to give both guys something to do. And the match itself never officially started, so it was just kind of all right, so you just watch Undertaker and Kane brawl around for a little bit as Undertaker tries to rip off Kane's mask before ultimately succeeding and forcing Kane to retreat to the back. Again, match never officially started, and it was just a big brawl for the sake of having a big brawl, and one that didn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, both towards the Undertaker-Kane long storyline or anything that was upcoming. Actually, the brothers would be reunited a few months later anyway, so it was kind of this ultimately kind of felt like a waste of time. They teased unmasking Kane, which they couldn't fully do. This just reeked of desperation just to try and have something interesting happen on the show, and it didn't work. But that's my take. We also get, right before the main event, there's one more moment where that is absolutely brilliant, and I kind of want to bring it up. So Kurt Angle, who's been trying to reach Stephanie all night, he finally decides to call her, and then the camera cuts to Triple H and Stephanie's dressing room as they're getting ready to get ready for the main event. And Stephanie answers her phone and says, "Hi, Mom," or something like that. And that was pretty funny and pretty clever. But in any case, so we're ready for the main event. The Rock defending his WWF Championship in a triple threat match against Kurt Angle and Triple H, with Triple H wanting to absolutely murder Kurt Angle for hitting on his wife and then kissing her just a few nights earlier. And the main event begins with Kurt Angle cutting a promo saying that he's sorry he didn't kiss Stephanie sooner, which enrages Triple H. Triple H storms down and proceeds to beat the ever-living shit out of Kurt Angle. And in a memorable blown spot, Triple H is going to pedigree Angle through the table, but the table breaks early, and Angle just face plants right into the table. It looks really bad, and he got a concussion from the scenario and was taken out of the match. Now, I believe it was planned that he was going to be removed from the match anyway. I think the match played out pretty much how they wanted it to, but Kurt Angle got a legitimate concussion for it. So not how you want to start your first pay-per-view main event, getting concussed. But Angle was taken out of the match, and it turned into Rock versus Triple H one-on-one. Another one-on-one encounter between Rock and Triple H. Match officially starts. They have their usual back and forth. Stephanie comes out, gets interfered, gets chased to the back, and then they show, this is where everything starts to get crazy. Stephanie talks Kurt Angle off of the stretcher, then walks him back out there to convince him to help Triple H, the man who put him on the stretcher. And it looks like Kurt Angle's going to help Triple H win. But Angle, remembering that he's part of this match too, takes out Triple H and then tries to beat Rock for the title. Now, I've heard Kurt Angle talk about this, and he said that basically everybody involved, Triple H, Rock, and Stephanie, basically had to talk Angle through the whole thing because he was out on his feet, basically, from the concussion. So, but ultimately, Rock is able to overcome all of the insanity and the love triangle, especially after Stephanie gets punched in the face by Triple H by accident because Rock ducked. Rock is able to get the win and cover Triple H for the victory and retain his championship. But that is not the big story, as the pay-per-view ends with Kurt Angle taking an unconscious Stephanie backstage, almost mimicking Hulk Hogan and Miss Elizabeth back from 1989. But that was a wild clown show of a main event, with the storyline taking precedence over the action. And I'm okay with it. I thought the match was a lot of fun. I thought it was very exciting, and I thought it was just a wild match from start to finish, and so much fun to watch. And it really speaks to how over that whole love triangle really was, because it was such an involving storyline, because they built tension between Stephanie and Triple H, and like sold the idea that not all was well in their marriage, especially when Trish Stratus got involved in that memorable "Show me some holds, Triple H," that whole segment too. And all the various other things they did to build into that. Now, the love triangle was such a hot storyline that it made the main event such a wild thing. Even though Rock kind of felt like a bit player and he's the champion, but the storyline was so well handled up to that point that it kind of worked. And the match itself was so wild and so crazy that it was definitely worth a watch and a strong closer to the show. Unfortunately, this was also kind of the peak of the love triangle storyline. Triple H and Kurt Angle would finally have their match at the very next pay-per-view, Unforgiven, and that was kind of petered out after that. It was a hot storyline that concluded with no real ending, unfortunately. But on this show, it was very, very hot, and it worked very, very well. So SummerSlam overall, it's got some pointless fluff on it, like the Undertaker Kane stuff, whatever. The Thong Stinkface match was stupid. There's a couple of quick undercard matches, but then you look at the big stuff on the card: Shane McMahon's big spot, Jericho and Benoit, the TLC match, and an absolutely crazy main event. There's a lot of really exciting stuff on the show too, and I think the good far outweighs the bad. And so much so, I would say all the big stuff basically delivers to where I would be tempted to give this show, if it's not an A, it's a very high B+, for sure. But I'm leaning more on A for this one because I thought the good stuff was really, really good. Again, Shane's big fall, the TLC, the main event, and Jericho and Benoit, all great stuff. And even the mixed tag I enjoyed for what it was. So, yeah, definitely a very strong pay-per-view, I thought, even with its missteps. SummerSlam 2000 is a show that was perfectly indicative of the wild and crazy nature and the exciting television that WWF was putting on at this time. Now, that concludes part 2 of the pay-per-view reviews for WWF. So join me next time where I will be covering the final 4 pay-per-views of the year 2000, and let's see how WWE closed out the year, shall we? But until then, that is all I have for you now. Now, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon below so you get notified when I post new videos, and follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description. But that is all I have for you now. Peace out, everybody.